Hello, I'm James Chau, host of the Pacific Dialogue. I'm in Hong Kong and delighted to welcome two guests, Professor Feng at Nanjing University and Professor Robert Ross at Harvard University. Robert Ross, let's begin with you. The next White House will be sworn in on January 20th. It's still a couple of weeks away and it feels still very long. What do you expect from Donald Trump between now and then? And what do you think he will do between now and then?
Well, what to expect? We never know what to expect from Donald Trump. But that's what's so worrisome, is there are a lot of possibilities out there that make us nervous. For example, just in the last few months, the United States has been breaking through all sorts of taboos with our arms sales to Taiwan and our visits to Taiwan. We have put new sanctions on Chinese companies affiliated with the PLA. So there are a range of issues which it seems like the Trump administration wants to take that would lock in the Biden administration, first of all. And second, perhaps reflect the president's own animosity toward the mainland, toward China. And third, it does seem like Secretary of State Pompeo is on a crusade, we might say, an anti-China crusade, so that we understand that his support for Taiwan is less about his support for Taiwan democracy, but more about what can we do to cause the mainland trouble. And so whether his visit to Vietnam, whether it's a policy toward Taiwan, whether it's ideological speeches, the combination of President Trump and Secretary of State Pompeo all the way through January 20th makes us nervous. Yes, there are things he can do, but we never know what they could be.
I think the Trump administration, and even along with some sort of a China hawk, Pompeo and other colleagues at the White House, I see our relations now is risk some sort of, we say, fundamental, demolition. So it's really, really horrible effect. And on the other hand, we also see that even President-elect, the Biden probably will getting back to some sort of a soundtrack. He will not just acting as we say mad as Trump, but the problem is today getting the China harder and also hitting the China bad is also some sort of across the spectrum we say consensus. So then I don't think the American administration under the Biden also will totally just the way say conducting some sort of a de-Trumpetist approach in its relations with the Beijing. So then, as you mentioned, a couple of weeks away from the President-elect Biden's inauguration. But the problem is we don't know how far the Trump will still just puncture China and get our relations just crash.
Well, the Biden-Harris transition team has begun to announce the people who are going to shape America's interactions with the world over the next 4 years. Robert Ross, do any of these people stand out for you? And what kind of tone and tempo will this White House then set through them?
I think what we're seeing is a team of negotiators, a team of problem solvers, not great global strategists, not geopoliticians, nor cold warriors. Now they look around the world and they say, what are the problems? Who can we negotiate with? Let's see if we can solve some of these issues that affect American interests, American national security. So as they approach the US-China relationship, the president, as well as his nominated or chosen Secretary of State, Blinken, have made clear that they will compete with China. And this, I think we all recognize, is inevitable. The two great powers, rising powers, status quo powers, have conflicts of interest in East Asian security. We will compete. And we will have economic friction. When President Trump came in, he adopted an all-of-government approach to containment of China, so that the American embassy in Beijing was de-staffed of all the experts, of all the functional experts, and dialogue ended. The State Department positions were never filled, and dialogue ended. This will be a government that will restore dialogue, restore experts, restore functional cooperation, compartmentalize the relationship.
I mean, certainly it's a very experienced lineup, Feng, when you look at people like John Kerry, the new climate change envoy, who of course is very familiar to China and also to the world. You've got foreign policy experts, you've got Antony Blinken, who people cite as the next Secretary of State. Are these individuals, is this team though, a lineup that China can work effectively with?
Yes, basically I agree. I think current foreign policy team pick by Joe Biden appear to be a very professional and even some sort of well experienced in international affairs as well as the China policy. So then that kind of professional foreign policy and the national security team, I think is some sort of bigger modification to deterioration of the China-US relations. Then we will see a lot of some sort of such big guys sitting in the Trump administration, just like Michael Pompeo and other Peter Navarro. They are also some sort of very emotional China hawks. So then they just trying to just how to say punch the China as a punch back, and particularly Bob also mentioned. So whatever we compete, but we also have to cooperate, because today I think the world affairs also just some sort of very, very inherently indispensable from one and another. So then US and China as number one and number two biggest economy, we are also obliged so much to assure, the world peace and we say economic stability and prosperity. So then I really understand how the American strategic community now is feel very, very anxious about China's rise. But the problem is, as I mentioned, we also should know US-China relations usually and also very, very, we say inherently is multi, we say face some sort of a story. So my view is this, Biden administration will not just get American policy of China back to Obama era. But the problem is those professional and well-experienced, the diplomats and the security experts, they know how to make some sort of even just a delicate balance between competition and cooperation. So I'm totally looking forward to that.
I had to ask either of you what your reaction is on this. There's been some dismay, quiet dismay, that while the Biden-Harris transition team has come in with a lot of grace and with a lot of pragmatism at the work ahead for them, there's been this rhetoric, which is somewhat familiar even now during the Trump era, of we're going to restore America's leadership to the world. We're going to be leading the world all over again. Is this, though, a mistake going back to that kind of American exceptionalism that commentators across the political board have been warning about and that got America into trouble in the first place?
I think we need to differentiate about American leadership in multilateral institutions. And in a large degree, this is what the Biden team is talking about. Reacting to American isolationism, American attacks on multilateralism, American attacks on our allies. And within multilateral institutions, America can play a leadership role. It can't play a leadership role without China, because without Chinese cooperation and US-China consensus, these institutions cannot succeed. On the other hand, leadership can be shared. And America and the United States can exercise leadership in NATO. It can exercise leadership in our allies around the world. It can exercise leadership in economic issues, particularly when it comes to negotiating with China regarding China's domestic regulations. That's very different from saying America can be number one in the world in terms of security in East Asia.
But Robert, will this fundamentally change things? I mean, we've seen, for example, you're at home teaching online classes. When you think about your students, your international students, do you think things will change for them? Because the kind of exchanges at student level or at diplomacy, for example, have in a way collapsed in the way that we once knew them. And these were the exchanges that really fueled the bilateral relationship for so many decades, since the late 1970s onwards. Will that reverse in some way, course correct, improve?
Well, I think what you're getting at here is, will countries look to America for leadership? Will students and intellectuals want to come to American universities? And this will take time to restore America's reputation in the world. It will take time for a number of reasons. One, people will continue to look at the United States cautiously. Can Biden restore and welcome that for the world to come to America? Can he begin to stand up for values that much of the world attested to, agreed upon, that Trump disavowed not just internationally, but he disavowed within American politics? So that will take time just to reassure people of confidence. Second, it will take time because President Biden's going to have a very large agenda. He's got to deal with the economy. He's got to deal with COVID. He has to deal with immigration. He has to deal with healthcare. So, and I think he will want to deal with immigration and visas for Chinese students as well, and opening up American universities to Chinese. But to many issues, I think what we should look for is not reversal of Trump policies, but rather a slowing down and perhaps doing nothing. Mm-hmm. So if the United States does nothing on Taiwan for 2 years, that would be welcomed by the mainland. If we just stop giving Pompeo's ideological anti-China speeches, that could be welcomed by the mainland. If we simply use the word People's Republic of China instead of the Chinese Communist Party, that would be a symbol for the mainland. So there are opportunities to signal a new change, a new direction, without necessarily a wholesale reversal.
Robert Ross, your book, China in the Era of Xi Jinping, describes the Chinese leader as the most powerful and decisive in decades. And we saw with Jimmy Carter and Deng Xiaoping how important it is for these personalities to actually find the right dynamic together. When both of you look at Joe Biden and Xi Jinping, two men who are already familiar to one another, do you think that that dynamic could then return to an era in US-China relations where great things happen, not just for these two countries, but really for humanity?
I'm skeptical whether the United States and China can reach broad breakthroughs to change the global order. And I'm skeptical that the personal relationship between Xi Jinping and Joe Biden can fundamentally affect the direction of the relationship. Certainly Xi Jinping is a political mastermind who always has his eye on China's interests and his political interests. And I don't think we can expect personal relationships to transform his objectives or even his policy. Having said that, this is a team that wants to accomplish something. This is a team that wants results, that wants to reach agreements with China. So the opportunity is there for this team that I believe will work together well. They are pragmatists and they are rational. They're not emotional, like Ju Feng was saying. These are rational people who approach the national interest in a rational way with attention to cost-benefit analysis to help the United States, and they recognize working with China is imperative. Whether we can reach agreements, as we say, it takes two to tango. The United States wants to work on North Korea. Will China cooperate? We want to work on Iran. Do we have enough common interests to reach agreement? Those remain open questions. And we'll simply say the opportunity exists today, unlike before under Donald Trump, for us to compartmentalize the relationship, to compete where we must and cooperate where we can. And that itself is better for mankind, it's better for the world, and it's better for US-China relations.
As you mentioned, both of you mentioned, so President-elect Biden and the Chinese top leader Xi Jinping, they had got well with each other in past years. But the problem is, what changed? The changed a lot is our bilateral relations and even very basic policy framework. So no one can overlook such a big change. So as Bob just very, very clearly mentioned, so then no one could just expect a lot under the Biden. Then the US-China relations were just warming up. But the problem is, I think at least there are two things we can expect very realistically. If the both sides decide to outreach very warmly and very positively, I think such an outreach will be echoed very positively. Because I think there's some sort of a growing, the sense of some sort of such a risk and a crisis over bilateral relations. So then outreach is very important. I mean, who will take the first step to just extend the hand and say, hi, my buddy. So let's just come together and sit down. Then the second point is also very important. What kind of policy expectation we want to fulfill
Professor Zhu Feng at Nanjing University and Professor Robert Ross at Harvard University, thank you both very much. I'm James Chau, to everyone watching us now, and as COVID-19 continues to overwhelm the world, take good care of yourselves and your families. Thank you for watching.